WiggleCulture here. I was asked, what is a food forest? So it does depend. So I'm just going to tell you what a food forest is to me. It's a garden that you're going to design based on what you see in nature. The forest out there, we have oak and pine forest here, just a mixture. We have very poor soil here. It takes the forest at least 100 years to make an inch of topsoil, if that. I've been out there. My forest is probably 120 years old at my guess, and I go out there. When I first start gardening, I try to scrape up forest soil, and I think, oh, I'll get a lot of topsoil, and there's nothing there. There's no topsoil, not an inch. You get right on top of subsoil, and it's an old forest. It's struggling to make a real sustainable soil. It takes hundreds of years around here. So how do we try to copy the natural system, which you have all these, somewhat of a diversity of plants and different levels, heights, layers of plants. You have big trees, you have vines, bushes, smaller trees that will never compete with the major overstory trees. And you have fungus, and you have grass and herbs and all these different layers. And, you can define the layers in different ways. Just, it's important to know that there are layers, so you try to fill them in. And the food forest idea is to try to build a forest out of everything that's edible. Try to have, you go out to a forest and it's all food. And you want it to be self-sustaining. You don't want to have a high maintenance. You have to prune some fruit trees and bushes and vines. You have to be involved with it somehow. You can't just let it run rampant. I think one of our key jobs as humans is to interact with nature and to use our creative nature that we've been given to create, and that means to manage. I'm not saying to have nothing, not to have anything that's completely wild, but a lot of the land is better off if it's managed by humans. I know that goes against the leftist agenda, where we're the problem, and it's not true. We're the answer. We can bring abundance and resilience and continual prosperity to ourselves and our following generations just by managing, being stewards of the land and doing a good job. It's waiting for us to interact with it. So I believe it's our mandate to get out here and create. And this is my version of a food forest. And this is about 4 years old, maybe, 4 or 5 years old going on. I'm not exactly sure. I didn't keep track of it. This is my oldest section. And then as we go up this hill, it gets to be newer and newer. These peach trees, I'm sure they were a couple years old when I bought them, but they're less than 4 years old, at least planted here, and they're just loving it. They're in a good place, so there's a lot of abundance here, and it's a very young food forest. You can see over there in the background, get some zoom action. That's what it looks like. That's a little better because it's been grazed, but a lot of the land in Virginia is at that broom sedge, very low humus soil. It's just dry, rocky ridges. It's good for cedar trees. It's good for oak trees, hickories, but not much else because of the previous land use. And that's another story. So what I've done is I've made hills and valleys, if you want to just call it that, to capture the water and stop it. As we're running downhill, this was a very poor, dry bit of pasture. It was every bit as bad as that top ridge over there that I was showing you. That's what all this looked like. And now it's, even just a few short years, it's changing. And I have made some mistakes, but I've also had some successes. Here we're looking at black locust and mulberries. The black locusts are a nitrifier. They're a fast-growing tree. They have roots that fix atmospheric nitrogen into the soil. And that's a lot to explain, but they're bringing in free nitrogen. Nitrogen is what, 78% of the atmosphere? We just got to get it out of the air and into the ground. We don't need mineral salts to do that. We just need to get the plants to do it for us, and also the rain. The rain, by some magic chemistry, if you want to say that, it has nitrogen available in rainwater. It comes down, brings nitrogen with it, right out of the air, right into wherever. And if you can stop that water, that rainwater, and soak it in, you're going to get free nitrogen. That's part of the sustainability. That's part of the goal of the food forest, is that you don't have to manage the fertility of it. It's just happening on its own, and it's building. You're not robbing from the soil and depleting it, you're increasing every year the fertility. The resilience is there because of the way of what you're doing. And key way is just managing water. And this is untended. It's early April here, so forgive the mess. It's going to get dealt with. But the layers here in this food forest, I mean, this dock, yellow dock, is actually edible and it has other uses as well. And it's just a weed here. The worst thing I don't want in my food forest is grass. But the mulberries really coming on strong. That thing just grows like crazy. All of this you're looking at is edible. Some of it's wild, a lot of it's wild, but some of it's not. Like the radishes I tossed in here. My sand cherries are blooming, but they're just not happy here. They're not happy. I thought they might be. So there's yarrow, it's a medicinal. A lot of chickweed. Over here you got bee balm, wild violets, yarrow, your blueberry. So this is like your bush layer. I got grapes. That one's not doing that well, but we just keep putting things in until they do well. You got wild onions. That's wild arugula, yellow rocket. This is poor man's opium, wild lettuce coming in all over, which I'll let come in. See the blackberries in there as well. And I have put in seed beds, just trying to, this was an old road that was coming through here that I don't really need, so we're working on, we do plant crops in here. Just regular vegetables and greens and so forth. So I'm just showing you some of my layers. I'm not over explaining anything here. It's just, here's some grapes. They're doing a lot nicer. And with grapes, they do better if you come out and prune some of those long vines, cut them back, little branches off the vines. You get more grapes. So you can come out and spend a little time and you just throw what you cut right on the ground. You can try to root the cuttings. You can just throw the cuttings on the ground, let them rot. Here's figs. And I lost them quite a few years in a row. First 2 or 3 years, the whole thing died back to the root. But now I finally have a head start on the year. So hopefully we'll have a good year for figs. So the grapes are looking great. So you can kind of see the idea of the overstory will be more of the black locusts, the tall ones over there. Then I've got wild apricots and wild prunes in here among the blackberries, and grapes among that. I have mint that I put along the edges of my garden just to kind of keep the grass out. I'd rather have mint taking over than grass. You can always dig it up and put it somewhere else. Prune is here. So this is what a food forest is to me. It's a regenerative, low maintenance. I'm fixing the problems that were created previously by agriculture, mostly corn agriculture before we had gasoline engines in Virginia. Everybody planted corn because the animals were the engines of agriculture. So they just planted corn and they just robbed the fertility out of every bit of open soil. And then when the gasoline engine came back, they just let the cornfields grow over and turn back to forest. That's how I know a lot of my forests around me, if they haven't been cut over, 120 years or so old, approximately. The idea of the herb layer is just, it's things that are self-sowing annuals or perennials. Obviously a food forest should be full of perennials. So I really focus on the fruit-bearing perennials in my food forest. That's what I want. That's what's going to grow here in Zone 7. Apples, pears, peaches, nectarines, hazelnuts, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, hazelnuts among these black locusts. And as these get to be the size for post, I'll just cut them and they'll just sprout back and keep growing me post while they're nitrifying. All this looks like weeds. It's all food in here. Not much grass anymore. And this will all die back in the heat. It's part of the plan. It's very sustainable. It's going to seed itself and come back next year over and over. It's always going to come back. It doesn't. This thing will produce food with or without me. It's going to do better with my input, but it will produce food for many, many years to come. This is a newer section. And again, various apples, figs, blueberries, rubus. We'll just say rubus for blackberries, raspberries, This is so wet down here, and this is my southern exposure, so I use this for greens. Now I have grass in there. I got to work this bed. So this is actually more of my traditional horticulture that you would see, more of traditional gardening. But I have like perennial onions there, Egyptian walking onions all along. So at any rate, the onions would take over if nothing else did. One of my ground covers I'm trying to get is strawberries all throughout. So this is the newer part of the food forest. And more perennial, that's a great perennial right there, is French sorrel. I do have the layers here, it just doesn't look like it because all my trees died out of this section. And I'm just going to go with that. I'm going to use it just for greens. Hazelnut there. Some really nice looking pears. They are not very old either, but they are just going crazy. That's not a 4-year-old tree. Let's say it might be 4 to 5. It's probably 2 years old when I bought it, 1 to 2. Add 3 years to it, and that's an amazing tree for the age. And I try to grow my herbs in there. I do have kale going and such. Kale's trying to go to seed. I overwintered it. Get out here and pick that. A lot of garlic. So there's just a lot of layers. This is the food forest. The water comes in and sits. It doesn't need me to irrigate it. The fertility is coming in from the leaves dropping, from the fruit dropping, from this very lush growth dying back in the heat. It's adding humus to the soil quickly. But I'm also bringing in a lot of fertility to start this thing off. So all this lushness is a result of my gardeners, the best gardeners ever, the cows. So the spent hay and manure, that's how I get my fertility. Here's an even newer part of the garden, food forest garden. And since it's so much open space before these apples fill in, I take advantage of it. I'm going to grow food in there until it gets so shady I can't. So the eventual goal is the food forest. Up here I have a miniature dwarf variety of mulberry. Looks like it's going to do well this year. And so I'm putting these beds in, and I'll use them for the years that I have before the trees take over. But then I'll just pull out of here and let it all just turn to forest. And if I lose my little blackberries or little blueberries, I'll just keep planting them in here. And if it turns out it's just not the spot for them, I'll keep trying until I get something that will be in here. That way, it'll be here for who knows how long. It's a lot of trial and error. You just try to put things in the right place. And instead of me trying to impose my will on the forest, I kind of let it do what it wants. I just give it some options. And if something dies, I don't get all bent out of shape. I just put something else in. And this is not forest, food forest at all, really, up here. But it's going to be. This all comfrey. That's a blackberry patch. So, and I do have some little trees here and there that will be coming up, slowly but surely. And this will all eventually be just a fruit tree forest with edible herbs underneath. And I do try to bring in oregano and thyme and onions, sage. And I definitely leave these wild edibles. There's some chicory. Chicory root's useful. I want Egyptian walking onions just going wild here, and that's what they're doing. I want them to naturalize. I do have grass in my food forest, so I'm gonna gotta take care of these aisles. I have a plan for that though. So I just want to have any kind of culinary herb that you could think of. I want it naturalized. Lemon balm, mint. I use all those type of things as ground cover. Strawberries. Working to get the strawberries going. Got blossoms on there, so we'll get some berries out of that. So to me, this is a food forest in the making, and it's very young. And as we progress through time, we'll see how it goes. So I hope I answered that question. Again, a big aspect of the food forest is sustainability and self-reliance. Not a whole lot of input. So I want the fertility to come in, I want the water to come in on its own, and then I want these plants to kind of just thrive where they're at, and trees. And I just want it to be here for my grandchildren. And they can just come walk through here. And one of my goals is diversity. I do try all kinds of different varieties. Try to get them, early varieties especially. Try to get them in here so you don't have the pest problems. But I try to get everything, as much diversity as possible. Not a monocrop singular. You get an orchard with just one kind of apple tree in there, and if you have any problems that year, you don't have a crop at all, really. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong with that. It takes a lot of management. I'm trying to work myself out of a job, not into a job. So this will become its own natural system. It's not going to look like a normal Virginia forest, but it's going to be its own brand of a forest. And I think it's along the lines, I'm shooting for something like the Garden of Eden. You just walk out there and you have food all over the place. Food falling off the trees. You just get the low-hanging fruit because you have such abundance. And you just learn the natural cycle and you show up and you get your all-natural, pesticide-free little blueberry here. So it's still alive. So if we don't get a late frost like we did last year, hopefully we'll have a really good year as a hazelnut. Doing pretty well right there. So if you have any questions, hopefully I gave a good answer to what a food forest is. It can certainly mean different things to different people. But I think the general idea is self-sustaining, low maintenance, resilient to weather swings and all of that. And encouraging diversity and just a natural food system. Well, thanks for watching. This is WiggleCulture out.